I have co-authored, like Blake said, a few books and a few books on my own. But today we're going to be talking specifically about Get Their Name. Now that sounds like a pretty simple kind of thing, does it not? But we find it difficult somehow in the church. Now, if we were a business person, which I have the background, by the way, I am laity. Did y'all get that yet? I am laity. So how many of you are laity in the house? Thank you for being here, and I have just given myself permission to be really hard on you today. All right, laity to lady, is that all right? Because I'm going to say things that your pastor's not able or willing to say. So, from time to time, I just tell you, put on your seatbelt, and that will be times to lock yourself in because it might be a little difficult to hear. Got it? That's how we're going to play the game today. All right. So I want to talk a little bit about being evangelistic and being missional. Now, in church life, many times we use these words like outreach. Now, folks, what does outreach really mean? Because if I ask 10 different people in this room, my guess is I'm going to get 10 different definitions of what outreach really means. Because we've used it in so many different contexts. Right? So then we say, well, we're going to have people do specific tasks within the church. And so we form a committee. We have a few of those in churches, do we not? So we form an evangelism committee. And what that means then is there is somebody and a small group that is responsible for reaching new people. Whew, that means the rest of us are off the hook, right? Well, that's the way we've treated it, right? Oh, but wait. We paid somebody. We pay somebody to go and reach new people. So then, that's the pastor's job. That's not my job. Why should I have to worry about that? Right? So simply by having an evangelism committee in our church sometimes does the opposite of what we're trying to do. Rather than having a culture of everyone reaching new people. So here's where I'd like to turn this term evangelism on its ear a little bit, and let's think about how are we being missional? Here's another word. I didn't say mission, I said missional. And let me give you the distinction in there. Being on mission, most of us say, is doing service, doing good deeds, right? We do a lot of good mission. But I'm going to ask you today to be challenged to think about being missional. By being missional, it means that we are living out the purpose of our church of why it exists. Now, when I'm doing consultations with churches sometimes, they spend days and weeks and months and sometimes years trying to figure out our mission. Okay, here's my first gift to you today. Your mission is to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. You don't need to figure it out. It's already been given to us. We just got to put it into action. So if we were to become a missional church, a missional people, a missional movement, then that means everything we do in our church would allow us to be looking through the lens of how are we doing with making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. Now, in Missouri, we've tweaked it a little bit. I think Jesus is okay with it, so let me tell you. What we have added is to make new disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. And let me tell you why we added the word new. We had some folks that said, well, wait, I'm doing great. I'm growing in my own faith. So we're making disciples, right? It's the 10 of us still in the pew that have been here for the last 10 years that haven't had any new people, but aren't we making disciples? Yes, and it's not just growing in our own faith. But when we're growing in our own faith, then we know it's our responsibility and our privilege to go and share with other people so that they have a relationship with Christ. So that's why we added new. It's to get in our minds that it's not about just us, but it's about us and. Us and. So that's my first challenge to you, is to think about, how do you become a missional church where everything you do is based on reaching new people, being a missional church to reach new people for Christ. Now, when I'm talking about the mission field, some people are a little uncomfortable with that word. My community, my neighborhood, what is your mission field? Now, if you have not clearly defined what your mission field is for your church, I ask you to pray about that and do some discerning work and also do some research. Because here's what we do. Y'all are familiar with Mission Insight, yes? They are a little demographic program. Well, you know, it has this default thing where you go in and it just does a default of 1 mile or 3 miles or 5 mile radius around the church, right? And so we just say, okay, default. All right, that's our mission field. And then we study based on that. Folks, I don't think that that's necessarily your mission field. It could be, but not necessarily. So give some intentional thought and research and prayer and discernment over, who is God calling you to reach? Who is God asking you to take responsibility for? In any given mission field, we know that there are 70% or more of your population is unchurched. Did you hear that? More than 70% of the people in your neighborhood are most likely unchurched. Did you hear that? 70%. Why are we having trouble growing when there are more unchurched than churched? Here's why I think we are. One of the reasons. Because we see ourselves as not having 2 mission fields. We see ourselves as having one. We see the preferences and desires of those of us who already have a relationship with Christ as the priority, rather than those that don't have a relationship with Christ having the priority. Let that sink in for a minute. Okay? I believe that to be faithful, to be a missional church, we must put the preferences and likes and dislikes and the ways that we need to reach the new people as a priority above those of us that are already here. All that we already have a relationship with Christ. But yet, time and time again, we allow the preferences and our relationships with one another, already in the church, to trump what we know we need to do to reach the new people. Now, I don't want you to walk out of here and say, that Khotan woman from Missouri doesn't like anybody who's already Christian. I hope that's not what you heard. What I want you to hear is, folks, we have to turn our eyes outward. We have to see the people who are searching, who are hopeless, who are lonely, rather than not making the tough decisions inside the church to be able to reach those people, because we don't want to offend the friend that we've been going to church with for 20 years. Am I messing now? Should I have said seatbelt first? Sorry, I didn't warn you. But folks, we have to get to the point of understanding our priority are the people who don't yet know Christ, and what must we do to reach them? And that has to be the priority over the other. So when we began to write Get Their Name, there were 4 things that we observed when we went out and did hundreds of consultations with churches who were desiring to grow. We found that inwardly focused churches found that evangelism was reconnecting with those who had moved on from the church. So, pastors, have you ever been in a situation where you walk into a new appointment and somebody met you at the door and said, Pastor, if you would just go and get those 50 people that the other pastor ran off, we'd be fine. Laity, listen up. Quit asking your pastor to do that. Okay, I hear your heart, laity. because they were your friends, some maybe family. I hear your heart. But the issue is when they're gone, they're gone. It is much more difficult to convince someone to come back than it is to go reach someone new. Because outwardly focused churches, their definition of evangelism is reaching new people, period. Because see, the problem is that when people are going out the back door and we don't notice, they're gone. We should have noticed in the first 2 weeks. We shouldn't have waited to 6 months and make it the pastor's responsibility to go and get them back. Right? Laity, this is a movement. Gosh, I think we already had a revival this morning. Did you feel it? This is the start of a movement. And laity, there's many more of us than there are pastors. We must lead it. We must be engaged. We cannot sit on our loins and ask our pastors to do it all. I don't think that's what Wesley intended of our movement anyway. Amen? Amen. All right, let's get going. All right, so the pool of unchurched, or the pool of church is shrinking, and those that don't have a relationship is growing. But yet, in the midst of that, our churches are declining. And the fourth is that we found when we were working with churches is membership doesn't mean diddly anymore. Sorry. Because here's the thing is we raised people from being a new disciple, maybe not even a disciple yet. We raised people from being a guest to membership. And they stood up and said that vow and had no clue what it meant. Because if we knew what it meant and we were practicing it, I don't believe we'd be in the shape we're in. Okay, that was another seatbelt, wasn't it? All right? Because membership just meant that I'm coming to the altar and I now have the privilege of preference for me. Rather than seeing myself as now a servant to go out and reach new people. So those were the four things that we found when we were out doing consultations. We did not set out to write a new book. Renovate or Die was our first book, and we started doing consultations, and we kept seeing these same things over and over and over. And here's what happened. We were doing a consultation one weekend, and an older gentleman approached one of our consultation teams and said, I'm upset with you. Did we offend you in some way? Have a tendency to do that from time to time. Speaking the truth. Amen, to speaking the truth. And he said, I get it. You tell me that evangelism isn't inviting people to church anymore. I get that. But you tell me to do a new thing to reach new people, but you haven't told me how. And he was right. He was right. How do we do this thing called evangelism in the 21st century without being weird? That was the motivation for us to share. So we believe that evangelism is building authentic relationships with people we don't know. That's how I describe evangelism. So that's the definition we're going to use from here on out. Now, part of what we have to learn to do is to share our faith story. Now, when we do consultations, one of the first things, and we thought it was a softball kind of question, to be able to say, just to put you at ease a little bit, just tell me about your faith story. And end that with where you've seen Christ at work most recently. And here's what they said. Well, I was baptized in the United Methodist Church, and I was confirmed in the United Methodist Church, and then I went away to college for a while, and when I started to have children, I decided I wanted them to be in the church, so I came back to church, and then I've served as trustee, and I've served as SPR chair and council chair, and I sing on the worship team. They told us their membership story. But they had difficulty telling us their faith story. And if they weren't able to tell us a time you've seen God, it was 20 years ago. Folks, we have forgotten, or we've never been taught, I'm not sure which, how to share our faith story. We have to capture our own faith story before we can share it. So here's where we're going to go. First of all, we're going to give you 4 steps. All right, I'm a step person. I'm kind of a logical thinker like that, so hang with me, all right? So there are 4 steps. One is faith sharing and service. And the second one, we're going to unpack these, so don't feel like you got to capture it all now, okay? Relational evangelism. And then you're going to share it in small groups. And then you're going to share in worship. And then you're going to share with those outside. Simple. Sounds simple, doesn't it? But folks, those 4 steps and developing them and feeling comfortable with them could take you up to a year or 2 in your church to move through. Do you hear that? So patience and persistence is going to be key here. You've got to start small. You've got to start with your group. That's why we wanted you to bring a group today. Because it's going to start with you all beginning to model and share your faith story. And then you're going to break apart and lead other small groups to share their faith story. So it can multiply. And before long, you have a whole church full of people who are comfortable sharing their faith story. So let's break this down a little bit. John, it's green bean time. I was in a meeting yesterday with John, and I said, John, you live close, right? He said, yes. And I said, John, I have homework for you. And he went, who are you to give me homework? He didn't say that, but I saw it in his eyes. I said, I need you to bring me some green beans. So he's anxiously awaited overnight to figure out what I'm going to do with a can of green beans. All right, so see if this sounds like one of yours. This is probably just a Missouri thing. It probably doesn't happen in Arkansas, but just go with it, okay? All right, so have you ever said, we're going to do a can drive? We just do that in Missouri, right? So you're going to the grocery store and you pass the green beans and you throw it in your cart, right? You pay for it. Sunday comes, and what do? But the children march it down the center aisle with the cereal and the mac and cheese and the green beans and the corn, and we stack it on the altar. Right? And then what? There is some faithful soul that after worship comes and takes all of these things off the altar, puts them in a box, puts them in the back of their van, and drives them across town to the food pantry. And then what? In the next few days or weeks, someone comes in and they see the can and they go, great, we're going to have green beans tonight. And they go home and they're not hungry. Folks, how is that any different than any other social agency? I don't believe that's the business we're in. And I apologize for calling it a business. I know that just offended some people. Now, I understand that God has called us to feed people and clothe people and give them shelter. But see, that's the good deed part of it. But we forgot the other part, the good news. What I have determined is we as United Methodist, I'm 4th generation, I own it. We have become passive evangelists. For us to have a new movement, to reach new people, we have to be active evangelists. That means eyeball to eyeball and belly to belly, people. That's none of this passive things that we're doing good things, but people don't know why and who. And most importantly, they don't know Jesus because we fed them. We're check writers and we're donators. We are not evangelists. So that's the first step. So here's the difference. All right, who wants to play along? I don't want to pick on the young people in the front row because I'm going to scare them as it is. Come on up. Tell me your name.
Pastor Lindsay.
Pastor Lindsay. Come on up, Pastor. Thank you. Thanks for playing along.
Okay, I'll play along.
You'll play along? All right. So what if Lindsay were the recipient of this corn? And rather than me having taken it or donated it to the pantry, what if somehow I had the opportunity to say, Lindsay, I know that the cupboards are a little bare right now, and I just wanted you to have these green beans. And, I am so blessed to be able to share a little bit of the abundance that God has created for me. And I wanted to share that with you and let you know that God loves you too. And if there's anything that I or my church could ever do to be helpful, would you please let us know? Here is my name and my number. God bless you.
Thank you.
Okay? John wants his green beans back.
John wants his...
Do you see the difference? Do you see the difference? What if the person who needed the warm coat got it from you? And you were able to look them in the eyes and share your heart. Now, am I going to tell Pastor Linda my faith story on day one? No. It takes building a relationship over time. So these in and out kind of things that we do, I think, are also the places where we fall short because we don't give ourselves the opportunity to build relationships. It's about building relationships. We're in the relationship business. First with us, and through the Holy Spirit, it leads to a relationship with Christ. But we can't do that if we're being passive. We must be active in our relationship building as evangelists, being on mission. All right, so the next one is faith sharing in groups. All right, so where do we want to practice sharing our faith stories? But the people we're most comfortable with. So every church has small groups. Your board or your council, the choir, the bells, SPR, trustees. You might even have a Bible study. Sunday school classes. Anytime you gather in a group, here's what we need to do. We need to practice our faith story. Leaders, we have to go first. Now, you got to start small sometimes. There was one pastor who said, great idea, I'm going to do it. Took it back to their church and they mandated every small group. There was a little pushback. So be careful. Remember, this takes time. Takes time to build this kind of culture. Because that's what we're doing, folks, is we're changing culture. We're changing DNA of how we do church and what's expected of us. So think about gathering in your small group. Start with prayer. And then we go around the table, and each of us said, so where have you seen God at work in your life in the last week? In the last week, not in the last 20 years, in the last week. Here's what happens, is when you know that when you gather in that group, you're going to be asked, you're going to be looking. And you know what? When you look, you find. It is amazing when you open up your eyes to see how God is working in your life, the number of opportunities that you will see that I would have missed that had I not been looking. Now, you know, when someone shares that moment and you get the goosebumps, you get the pricklies on the back of your neck, you know those kinds of faith stories? Those are the ones then that go outside of the group. When you're moved by someone else's faith story, then that's when we suggest going to the greater audience of your worship experience. So we've practiced in small groups, and once we've got that prickly one where you're hearing people's hearts speak, do you know what I mean? It's not words. Their heart and soul are being poured out, and you felt the Spirit moving with their story. When you do that, then we're going to share in worship. Now, some of us may call testimonials. Now, let me give you a few suggestions when we start sharing faith stories in worship. What you may want to do is videotape it ahead of time. Now, some people maybe can't stay within the allotted time. Some people, do you see the countdown up here? I'm calling it out on myself. Some people get nervous and ramble, they don't stay on point. But you also sometimes have a very limited amount of time. So do it ahead of time. It's just you and the videographer in a room. It's a little more comfortable. And do a 2 or 3 minute testimonial. That faith sharing story. Where have you seen God at work? Now, Wesley would say, how goes it with your soul? I think kind of the modern way to say that so that people can hear it a little better is, so tell me where you've seen God at work in your life in the last week. Because if we say, would you stand up and give a testimonial on Sunday? There's a little butterfly action going. But if you say, that story that you shared in small group was so inspiring, could we just tape that and allow us to share that with our worshiping community on Sunday? Now, let me give you another little example. I was in worship one Sunday. I was getting ready to do a consultation the next week, so they didn't know me yet. So I was able to go in and be a guest I call it a mystery worshiper. They didn't know me yet. And so it gives me really good insight into how the experience is on Sunday, as well as other mystery worshipers and so on. So here's what the pastor did. There's an event in Missouri that they call WOW. Don't ask me what the acronym stands for, but it's a youth thing, right? And it's an annual event in Springfield, Missouri, where 2,000 youth from all over the state come, and they bring in really cool speakers that the kids think are cool, right? Not us old folks. And it's just this wonderful experience. Well, this particular church had about 15 youth on Sunday, on average. But they had just sent 40 children to this youth event called WOW. So on that particular Sunday, they put the pictures up, still pictures of the kids in the WOW event, which was cool, right? And they did that just as a piece of worship. So let's turn that on its head a bit and think about this in a different way. So we sent 40 children, which means 25 were not connected into the life of the congregation. So that meant that 25, it might have been their first experience with Christ and hanging out with other kids who had a belief in Christ. But yet we had still photos. So what if instead the sponsor had been doing videos about, so where did you experience God today? Tell us about how your heart's been changed by this event. And these youth were sharing from their heart. And then, what if we tied that into our offering? So it could go something like this. As the ushers are coming forward, I'd like to share with you some great news about what happened in our congregation last weekend. We sent 40 youth, 15 are our own kids, but 25 are from our neighborhood. 25 children experienced Christ for the first time, thanks to you and your generosity. So as the ushers come forward, I'd like for you to understand and know how your dollars are impacting the lives of our children in our community. And so, as the offering is coming forward and being taken up, the video of those children verbally sharing their experiences were to come up. All the elements were there. We just need to share it in a different way. Does that make sense? Y'all with me? All right. So then we're ready to go and share it out in the world. But you see, we sometimes think we're just ready to go share it in the world right now. when we haven't learned our own faith story first. I'm very frustrated sometimes when you go into churches and will say, well, I invite people to church. Now, let's think about this for a minute. All right, it's Joe. Don't you love sitting on the front row, Joe? All right, so Joe, we've never met before, right? And you're thinking, I wish I hadn't at this point. So, Joe, if I came up to you just right now and I said, Joe, why don't you come to my house for dinner tonight? He doesn't even know what to say. Right? Would that be a little weird? That would be weird, right? But yet, isn't that what we do to people to say, you should, that's the other word, you should come to church? I have no relationship, like with Joe. I have no relationship with Joe. Joe has no idea who I am, nor does he know what kind of cook I am. Right? That's just weird. But that's how we have been taught evangelism. Oh, you need to invite him to church. However, if Joe and I had met 2 or 3 times, are you his wife? Yes. So Jennifer, if I had built a relationship with Jennifer and Joe both, right? And we knew one another and hung out a few times in public places. And then I said, Joe and Jennifer, it'd be great for you to come to dinner. I'd love for you to meet my husband and my son. Won't you come and join us and you bring dessert? Right? That's very different because I've built a relationship first. See, that's what 21st century evangelism looks like, people. It's relationships. To think that we're going to go and ask someone blindly and tell them they should be at church or they should come to church, and especially not bring them with us, is a misnomer, especially when we do not live in a church-centric world anymore. Remember, we used to be the dominant ones of being churched, but we are no longer. So there's skepticism of all sorts for a whole variety of reasons that we won't spend time on today. But there's a different way, and it has to be personal, one-on-one. This is belly-to-belly, eyeball-to-eyeball work, folks. It has to be authentic. People will see through if you're doing it simply because that's what you think you should do, not because you have a heart for Christ and want to share that with others. And it needs to be very specific. If people come in on the elbow of someone else, they are much more likely to have a better experience, and they're much more likely to stay. Does that make sense? All right, so let's take a look at this. So to start with, we got to start some conversations with some people, right? We're going to get a little deeper into this, but I want you to start thinking about this process. When we get to this 4th step of sharing in our community, we got to start conversations. We got to slow down a little bit. And then we got to get their name. It's kind of like, can you imagine going on a blind date? And at the end of that date, you don't exchange phone numbers. Now, to me, that's been a long time since I've dated. But to me, if at the end of the date there was an exchange of phone numbers, I would say that didn't go so well. But yet, don't we do that out in the community? Now, I'm not saying go into Quick Trip. Well, it's Come and Go. Is that right? Come and Go here? Come and Go, sorry. It's Quick Trip in Kansas City. When you go into Come and Go, the first time in, you ask the cashier for her name and number. I am not suggesting that. But I am suggesting over time that you get to know those folks, and then it will make, and they usually have name tags, and start calling them by name, getting to know them over time. Remember, this is a long-term thing. This is not something that you all are going to start practicing tomorrow. and have 12 people show up on Sunday. It doesn't work that way. So let's go back to the relationship thing. Now, how many of you went on your first date and on your second date you got married? Really? Oh, you're just itching your head. I really thought we had somebody back there. I always tell a story. I was married 90 days after my husband and I met. You know, kind of when you know, but I was a little older, just a little older when that. But folks, we never slow down enough and see people as God would see them. Do we see the person behind the counter who's barely getting by? Do we see the person behind the counter who it's their first day and they're flustered? And they're just trying to make it to 4 p.m. or 8 p.m. or midnight whenever they get off. Do we really see them? No, because we're in our own world with our blinders on, living in our little Christian dome. And who do we hang out with? Other Christians. Think about your social circle. Think about your social circle. Who is in your social circle? My guess is it's other Christians and probably people that you go to church with. And there's nothing wrong with that. But the problem is we don't leave any room for new relationships with new people who don't yet know Christ. So think of a Lego block. And you know it has those 8 little nubs? The larger pieces have the 8 little nubs on there. If those are 8 relationships that you're culturing right now, how many nubs are open on your Lego block for new people? Would you be willing to lift some people off of your Lego block in order to be open and willing to have new relationships with new people? Because when we just hang out with our own friends who are mostly Christian, we lose sight of our community. And here's what I mean by that. You go into a church and you say, well, what are we going to do? We need to shake it up a little bit. We need to do some new things. And I say, great, we're going to do a survey. Don't y'all love those? We're going to do a survey. And then, well, who are we going to survey? Well, we're going to do it on Sunday morning in worship. So think about this. We're going to survey the people that are already here to figure out how we're going to reach new people or how we should do new worship. We ask the people that are already here. And then we say, well, we know exactly what we need to do to reach people because we just surveyed 100 people. Well, yeah, they were all Christian people who already have a relationship with Christ, who are already in the church, of course. But my guess is they would answer the questions very differently than those outside. So then when we're socializing outside the church and they're still all with Christian folks, we believe we know our community based on our interactions with the people in our circles. But remember, your people probably represent 30% of the population. The other 70% go unrepresented in your mind and through the lens of your perceptions and the decisions that are made in your life and in the life of the congregation. In order to reach new people, we have to get out of our Christian dome. We have to get out of our church buildings. And we got to get out of our comfort zones. Because our comfort zones are really nice and comfy. And our behinds have made a nice imprint because we've been sitting there for a long time. So if we're going to have a revival, if we're going to grow by one, if we're going to reach new people, we're going to be uncomfortable. But think of the disciples. Leave everything behind. Leave your family. Leave all your possessions and come follow me. I'm not asking you to leave your family. I'm not asking you to leave your possessions. I'm just asking you to get outside your comfort zone and be faithful to what Christ has called each and every one of us to do. And that's to reach new people so that He can have a relationship with the people who do not yet have a relationship with us. It's not about me. It's not about the church. It's not about the United Methodist Church. Folks, this is kingdom work. And I don't care what label we put on ourselves. It's kingdom work. And we're all called to reach new people. That's session 1. And I'm going to turn it back over.